Hey folks, it's Nate bringing you another Iron Age comic review. Today we are taking a look at Journey to Elysium, The Remains of Babylon by uh, Bonsart, Bokel, and Johann Alexander. They are bringing you a very interesting steampunk comic. It is, as you can see, not a chunky boy like some of the other comics I've reviewed, but we'll talk about more about that in a second. What's really interesting about this is it's part of a larger publishing line referred to as the Association of Ishtar, which is a steampunk, I believe, multiversal kind of a setting where there's the association that's mentioned in the title. They go to these different worlds using their steampunk technology to solve cosmic threats or deal with cosmic problems. I'm not super familiar with everything this implies because this is my first exposure to it. But this doesn't seem to be like a Marvel style multiverse where you get a whole bunch of iterations of the same character, but rather a bunch of places where the world has developed very differently with different people and different political groups and maybe even slightly different technologies. That's not clear yet. But the Association of Ishtar travel to them and kind of, you know, I'm not sure what all they do, but they seem to travel to them to learn things, deal with certain kinds of problems. Um, that's the summary as I've heard it on a couple of live streams. I have also spoken directly to Mr. Bokel on a live stream. He was more asking about how I approach retrofuturism and things like that. We did talk a little bit about his writing style and his philosophy, but less about the overall story here. But he does also have a very interesting series on steampunk and how he looks at historical figures. Very fun stuff. And I was very interested in seeing what all he did here. Now, physically, what you get in this campaign is this comic, which is about 24, 25 pages, give or take. And then there were, some cards and bookmarky type stuff. All in all, for $15 on an independent project, that's not a terrible deal. Certainly, this is not an iconic comic project where you get a hardbound 80-page graphic novel for $15, but they have much better economies of scale, so I'm not really holding that against him. What you get here is pretty interesting. It's a fun read, and it's not a bad quality book for something that is so small. It is still perfect bound. The internal pages are very nice. They are almost full bleed. You can see there is kind of a little bit of a border around here, but printing pretty much runs all the way up to the end, which is a bit different from a lot of other comics. And all in all, it's quite nice. Physically, really the only thing I have to say about it is, and this may just be my copy, I recognize there's all kinds of production problems that can go into something like this. I don't know if it shows too well there, but that white sliver on the bottom is not entirely the page there. I don't know if it was just slightly off center and it didn't cut off in the bleed zone on the bottom or what. It's a very, very minor production issue. Worth pointing out, but I'm sure it's not going to be in the entire print run. Not a huge issue. I don't have a problem with it. But it is just something that kind of catches your eye as you flip through the book. But other than that, a pretty good quality book for what something this thin. Like I don't know if you could even hard bind something this thin and have it feel good. It would feel almost like you were holding a kid's book. This soft cover version really does kind of feel better in the hand, I think, than having like that big, chunky cardboard spine for so few pages. So maybe a hardbacked omnibus, although I don't know if there really be a huge call for that. I believe 75 or 76 people back this. So there's clearly not a big readership yet. Hopefully that can grow because I do like this story. So let's talk about that story. What kind of a story do we have here? Well, it's fascinating because this is clearly a complete story and yet also a small chunk of a larger story. And there are a lot of people who benefit from taking a look at this and seeing how you tell a complete story in your first installment that still snags people and keeps them intrigued in what's going to come after. This is actually a story about two key players, it looks like. One of them is the seventh chairman. That's actually the lady here on the cover, and she is here to recruit an engineer who builds rockets. At the same time, we have a storyline following Maurice Havlar, who is this character here at the writing desk. And he is what we would call a secondary protagonist or a deuteragonist. We don't get a whole lot of him in here. I think he's on a grand total of about 4 pages, maybe 6. But he seems to be a framing device for this first installment. But he definitely feels like he's going to have a bigger part to play in future installments. And we are getting this entire story framed as a bit of a flashback, something he's telling us in a diary entry, in this case, after everything has happened, which is a really fun kind of a framing device, very tried and true. We know that this entire story revolves around Elysium, which is, of course, in the title, and we're trying to get there. If you look here on the cover, you can kind of see Elysium right up here by the moon. It's that weird bell-shaped shadow, and it's a bit of a mystery to everyone down on Earth. And Haverall is actually from Elysium, while the seventh chairwoman is from Earth. So they're trying to get to each other, and clearly these two stories are going to meet at some point. There's a really great transition here early on, where you see Haverall dispatched by airship to this little oil rig. And then on the next page, we also see an airship coming to the oil rig, and the seventh chairwoman gets off. And we're told this happens a few weeks earlier. It's a very nice transition that tells us how everything is going to tie together without actually telling us anything about the story. Finding good ways to give your audience that kind of information is really strong and I think a good part of storytelling. I like the story we got in here. It's not terribly action-packed, but it does a great job of setting up characters and giving us an idea of who they are and how they're probably going to come into conflict, as well as giving us a strong secondary conflict that can come to a climax in this issue and then be resolved in a way that clearly sets up the main conflict of the story. I'm going to talk more about that in the spoiler talk when I give my critique and my feedback in greater length. That's really all I have to say about the story here. I think it's good. I think it's a good setup. It is clearly a setup to a bigger story, and it got me interested what all that story is going to be. Artistically, Alexander is a pretty good artist. He has I don't want to call it a cartoony style, but it is not a super realistic house style like you might see in DC or Marvel. It is, as you can see through the look of the face here, is a little cartoony. It's not what I would describe as Cartoon Network style, and it's not really an anime or a manga style. It has its own distinct visual identity, which can be really hard for some artists to develop. But here, I would not confuse Alexander's art with the art of pretty much anyone else I've seen in the indie comic space. So it's very clear, very distinctive. It has very nice colors. It's kind of a pastel palette, but a muted pastel. We're not going to see any really bright garish colors here. The retro futuristic look is very well executed on. There are some things in here that I think could be done a little bit better. I would like a few more sound effects in the art, and I tend to consider that sound effects are weird. They're kind of a hybrid responsibility between the artist and author. Sound effects do a lot to give a sense of atmosphere, not just in what the sound is, but in the way they are typeset, the size of the typeset, where they are in the frame. A good example of this, there's a doorbell. I went past it. So there's a doorbell ring here, and it's a very interesting a bit of contrast. So one place, and this is one place where it's kind of well executed on. One of these days, I will set up a camera that's better for the time So we have this introductory setup framing device panel. And it's very rainy, it's very windy, it's kind of dreary. And then in the middle of that, we have this bright ding. And then we have a bunch of people pointing rifles at the door. There's a nice contrast there. And you can do that with sound effects, but you can also have kind of a muted, rain sound effect. That kind of builds the atmosphere as well. And there wasn't any of that in the setup. If you had something like that, narrower letters, more of a dreary color, you could set up that contrast better. That's something, and I really think this is a little bit more on the artist because they are doing the visual part of the story, and this is part of the visual experience of it more than the verbal experience of it, which is primarily what the writer does. So for Alexander, I would keep an eye out on your sound effects, ways you can use them and incorporate them to make your visual storytelling better. Of course, check with your author whenever you do that. But I think there's some potential there that is partly realized, but could have been given a little bit better. Another thing to watch for is leading the eye. Leading the eye is something that I find really important in not so much as a bedrock of storytelling, but it elevates decent visual storytelling to great visual storytelling. So what are some ways we could lead the eye? Let's look at this page right here. Here we have, our airship coming in, then these two guys talking about it. We have no clear visual lines in this, except perhaps this horizon line. So here we have the airship. The horizon, of course, leads us over here to the speech balloon. Then the speech balloon is just sort of hanging out here by itself. Now, we're just going to reset back here to this speech balloon because that's the way people naturally read. But if there was a tail from this speech balloon to this speech balloon, then the eye more naturally runs over here rather than coming back and completely re-examining this panel to see if there's anything else we need to take away. And then here we have a visual line from this guy to this guy, but then his sight line is going down like this. So our eye line is naturally brought down here looking for something when we actually want to be over here. So that kind of, leading the eye naturally across the page makes it a little more intuitive to get across the page. Not a big thing, but like I said, I think it's the difference between a basic comic page that is readable and understandable, one that really just sings to you. You kind of flow through it naturally, and you feel the pacing at each step as you go. All in all, though, the presentation is good, storytelling is good, and it promises an interesting story to come. At $15 for 20-some pages, it's a little steep. Admittedly, in this day and age, your average 20 to 24-page comic is going to set you back $6, give or take, depending on who you get it from, unless you get it from Alterna Comics, because they do newsprint. But $15 is still a lot more than $6, more than twice as much. In fact, it's 150% more. So, at that price point, it is a little bit much to ask. I understand that this is an independent comic, and just have more overhead. You don't have economies of scale. Unfortunately, because of the price point, I can really only recommend this to people who are very interested in sci-fi stories or steampunk stories. Because this is both, and I think it's very good as both. But I don't see anything in it that is really going to grab and appeal to an audience outside of those subgenres. Let's get into the critique, because I do have a couple of things that I think are worth talking about here. The first one is the climax of the story. It is a showdown between the rocket engineer, name has escaped me, and the seventh chairman. I will get you the rocket engineer. Second, Ghulam Ali. So Ali is the manufacturer or the creator of Comet Rocket, which is a rocket ship. Basically, he was trying to get up to Elysium at one point in the past. His rockets all seem to have suffered terrible disasters, so he never got there. And the seventh chairman is there so he can try again. We don't really know why she wants to try again. We don't even know clearly what she's the chairman of, but what she's trying to do. Okay, perfectly well and good. Ali does not want to make another attempt here. The seventh chairman kind of twists his arm into it. There is a really tense stare down where we see that Ali has loaded up the rocket ship with explosives and has it wired to this detonator, and he's threatening to destroy the rocket so that the chairwoman can't get it. And they have stare down. She's trying to convince him to make one last shot at flying up there, and he's like, no, this is a fool's errand. And I like the paneling there. We see Ali looking up at a poster of him in his heyday, and then, he has his finger hovering over the button the whole time. The seventh chairwoman is looking very nervous about it, and finally he hands over the detonator. It happens all over a page, a pretty tense page. It's well paced and tells us a lot. What my only issue with it is that when we see the chairwoman, or the seventh chairman, I guess, we see her with both times with her entire focus on Ali. And we don't really get a sense of when he looks up at the poster, we get a sense of what he's thinking, but I don't really have a sense of what she's thinking, other than that maybe he might lose. I'm not sure if this is ambition, if she's worried about her safety at this point. I don't know if she's really just invested in this idea of exploring Elysium. She doesn't seem like that kind of character from everything else we see about her in here, but it's hard to tell clearly what she's pushing for. And that leads into my bigger question mark here. We know that Seventh Chairwoman and Ali are going to go to Elysium, hopefully. And of course, Averell is from Elysium and seems to have his journey down into what they call Hades, which is apparently their name for Earth. His journey is prompted by something, presumably Chairwoman and Ali. What I don't have a clear sense of here is stake, in the broader sense. And I think for the Chairwoman, that's fine. Obviously, for her, the stakes in this story is the rocket. She needs the rocket to get what she wants, which is to go to Elysium. If she doesn't convince Ali, he blows up the rocket. She has no rocket. She doesn't get to Elysium. Very clear stakes there. So since she has a clear stake, at least in this part of the story, I don't need to know too much about why she wants to get to Elysium. What's less clear to me is the stakes for Averell. We know that he is being sent down into Hades, and that it's top secret. We don't really know what the stakes are if he fails. And that is a bit of a problem. Not the hugest part of the story. And again, it's clear that he's going to be more important second part of the story from the first couple and last couple of pages. What I don't understand is what he thinks is going to happen if he fails. So I guess I would have liked some sense of what is at risk for him. What would have happened if he didn't do what he set out to do? And yeah, it just would have helped me a lot to understand. Like, clearly, I'm supposed to care about this character, and I can kind of see a conflict coming. But since I'm not sure what his skin in the game is, he seems to be a bit of a free-floating character. And he has a briefing where he could have had a great chance to hear what the problem would be from his CO. So I feel like that was a missed and rather important story beat to fully get us on board with the story. You're going to take almost a quarter of your 24-page book to tell us about this character. We really need to know what he's in it for, what his skin in the game is. We know that he is there to serve, but what happens if he doesn't serve? Is he just ashamed of himself, or is there some consequence beyond that? I would have really liked to know. Um, those are my my two bits of feedback there. I think it's got a very strong sense of conflict. It's not a visual conflict, but a conflict of personalities and wills. And I think it's pretty well presented. Again, I would have liked a little more interiority for one of the contestants, but the other one is pretty well illustrated for us, quite literally. And I would have liked a better sense of what our secondary protagonist is actually out here to get. But you know, we didn't get that without it. Did a bad book? No, it's still very good and interesting. Could have been a little bit better. Much like the visual issues I pointed out, I think it's the difference between a good story and a great one. And yeah, those are my bits of critique and feedback for the writer and the artist. Hopefully, something in there is helpful to them or to you if you are looking to do a comic in the future. Let me know if you've read this, what you thought of it down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit. I'll talk to you later.